Good morning. I'm Dave Kaufman, in for the birthday boy, Elias Makos. You can follow me on Twitter at The Kaufman Show. And we are just looking at getting the numbers into the system right now. We're going to start our conversation with Dr. Labos, and as soon as we have the numbers up, we will give them to you. But right now, are you double vaccinated? Well, did you know that although it's unlikely, it's still possible for you to contract COVID? The big question is this something that we need to be concerned about? Let's bring in Dr. Chris Labos. He's a cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology. You can hear him every Sunday morning on Weekends with Ken, 8:10 on Sunday morning. Dr. Labos, good morning. Nice to hear from you.
Nice to hear. Nice to speak with you as well.
So tell me, I'm double vaccinated right now. I'm not quite in the. It's not D-Day for me. I'm not walking through Times Square kissing everybody, but I definitely feel like I can shake hands and I can go out and I can hug my dad again. Can I still get COVID?
It is theoretically possible, but the risk of that is very, very low. Now, as you suggested, I don't think you should take the vaccines as an excuse to go around licking doorknobs. Right. So we still have to have some degree of caution, but the risk of you getting sick is now very, very much reduced. But it is still possible. And so when people say, well, I'm double vaccinated, why do I still have to be careful? It's because, first of all, a lot of people are not double vaccinated yet. And we're going to have to realize that there still could be some viral transmission. So we have to realize that while you are very, very, even if you did get sick, you would likely have a very mild form of the infection. Some of the more vulnerable people in our society, especially older people, people living in long-term care who have pre-existing medical conditions, if they got sick, they could still have complications. So we still, until we can essentially eliminate COVID, and hopefully we will be able to do that, you still have to be a little bit careful, especially if you're going to be interacting with people who are themselves at risk.
Right. So if you're going to the hockey game on Friday night, you have no idea how many of the 3,500 people you're going to be with in the Bell Center are vaccinated or even double vaccinated. And that's why it's maybe smart, not maybe smart, it is absolutely smart to keep your mask on and keep your distance.
Right, exactly, because you don't know what the medical status of all these individuals are. Now, if you're having a dinner party at your house with like a couple of friends and you know that you and all your friends have been vaccinated, then you could be like, well, the risk here is very, very low, and that's why you're seeing the evolution of the public health guidelines regarding mask use. So that situation is very different than being in a crowd, 10,000 people strong outside the Bell Center where everybody's cheering. So it's really context specific, and most of this stuff I would hope would be intuitive to most people. So you really have to look at the context of the situation and decide how risky this is. And most day-to-day interactions that we're going to have now, especially if you're double vaccinated, are in fact going to be low-risk activities.
And this is now something the onus has gone from being on the government to being on the individual. So 6 months ago, we were not given the choice to go fraternize in a bar or a restaurant. Now it's up to us whether we want to take that risk, right?
Exactly. And, you're going to see the government really step back. The problem, too, is that as the situation becomes more complex, it can become increasingly more difficult for the government to issue guidelines that can apply in every specific situation, because you're going to get, increasingly, well, what about me? And what if I have 2 vaccines and my friend has 1? But what if we're going to have a dinner party and my friend has kids who have not vaccinated? Like, there's so many different permutations that it's going to be, from the practical point of view, impossible to address all of these. So you really just have to look at them and be like, okay, is everybody in this group fully vaccinated? If yes, I think we're going to be okay. If some people are not vaccinated for whatever reason, well, maybe we need to be a little bit more careful. So again, it's going to require a certain degree of logic from people moving forward in order to assess the actual risk.
I'm Dave Kaufman, in conversation with Dr. Chris Labos on CJ 8800. Dr. Labos, did you hear Trudy in the 11 o'clock news saying that the numbers are potentially have been undercounted across the country except for in Quebec for death tolls? Was that a surprise to you?
No, not really. Here's the problem. Establishing cause of death is actually a lot more complicated than people think it is. And a lot of people, especially early in the pandemic, likely died of COVID or complications of COVID, and there was no proof of it. Because remember, early on, nobody was getting, it was very hard to get tests. So the fact that the deaths were undercounted is not a surprise at all. That frequently happens. In fact, this happens regularly with the flu every year. So the CDC has flu counts, but then they ultimately end up correcting those numbers as more data comes in. So the fact that deaths are underreported is not a surprise. It's actually fairly common, and there are ways to deal with that statistically. And that's what you're seeing that this report was doing, saying, well, based on what we know now about the transmissibility of COVID and how many presumed cases we actually had, we can assume that a number of these deaths that happened in, at home with no medical testing around probably were due to COVID. And so we can develop estimates of how many people actually died. And that number is almost certainly higher than what's been reported up until now.
Okay, so Dr. Labos, take a trip through my brain with me for a second here and see. I'm going to see if I can work out what's going on in my head. Mm-hmm. If the numbers have been undercounted in Canada, and the number is actually, if added up and is in line with what was said, would probably be about 1/10 of America's death toll, which would make sense population-wise. And yet Canada had so many more measures put in than the United States. Is that fair? Or would you turn around and say, well, the U.S. probably undercounted theirs too?
No, that's exactly right. The U.S. probably undercounted their death toll as well. So that's why. Now, for Canadian versus U.S. statistics, we often use that metric that you said, divide by 10. That usually gives you a good rough hand calculation. But the problem with the COVID numbers is that there is a lot of uncertainty about what the numbers actually are, and we're not going to be adjusting those numbers down over time. We're going to be adjusting those numbers up because many of the cases went undiagnosed. Because remember, the big problem early on is that it was impossible to get a test. Many people got COVID, assumed they had COVID because of the symptoms, but never received a confirmatory test.
Yeah, in fact, Quebecers were told to just stay home. They were told to not go for a test, that the system was not able to handle it at first. I'm afraid when you look at that and they say Canada's numbers were undercounted and they were actually 1/10 of the U.S.'s, that people will then turn around and say, well, then why did we close everything down when they stayed open to have the same relative numbers? But I take comfort that you're saying that no, the numbers were probably undercounted in the United States as well. Dr. Labos, we have the numbers for today, only 71 new cases. When you see that it was 76 yesterday and under 100 the day before, there's no way to look at this other than as encouraging, right?
No, exactly. The situation is very, very good. The number of cases down, the vaccination rates keep going up. The trick is going to be not to become victims of our own success, to realize that we're doing well. We've got to keep doing the thing that has gotten us out of this pandemic, which is vaccinate everybody. We've got to make sure everybody gets their second doses because we have to position ourselves in a good place for the fall. Because remember, the case counts were very, very low last summer, right? Through all of July and August, there was virtually no COVID going around. Everybody was happy, and then it started to spike up again in the fall. So we have to make sure that everybody is vaccinated, or as many people as possible are vaccinated, so we don't see a resurgence come September. Because by that point, the reality is that the Delta variant is likely going to be the dominant strain here in Canada. And so if there are pockets of unvaccinated people, they may be the source for future outbreaks.
Final question for you, Dr. Labos. We're still seeing people that are refusing Moderna vaccines. That let's say they got Pfizer for the first one, and they say, no, I don't want Moderna for the second one. I want Pfizer again. What is more similar, Pfizer and Moderna, or Coke and Pepsi?
They're both very, very similar. I mean, remember the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are very, very similar, same mechanism of action. We were joking with a friend that there's likely going to be a series of patent fights between the two companies because their technology is so similar. I wouldn't hesitate for a second about using those two vaccines interchangeably. Then again, I can't really taste the difference between Coke and Pepsi if you didn't tell me beforehand. But I genuinely wouldn't worry about the interchangeability of the vaccines in that respect.
Well, you can hang out with me. I can take the Pepsi challenge any day. I'll tell you which one. I can separate those two with my eyes closed. And I feel like this is something that when we look back on the pandemic, one of the things that I think we will all scratch our heads about is how Pfizer got placed so far above everything else in the conversation. I've been vaccinated for a billion different things since childhood. I just found my carnet de vaccination from when I was a little kid. And nobody ever asked what company was making. Even the flu shot that I got last year, I have no idea who made it.
Yeah, no, and this is the thing. Like, people don't ask where vaccines come from. All of a sudden, they do. I mean, Pfizer benefited from being first out of the gate, the first vaccine approved, and they, frankly, because they were a more established company, just had the capacity to manufacture more doses, and ended up being the one that most people got. Moderna, even though it's a fine vaccine, because they're a smaller company, just couldn't make doses as quickly, and really just lost market share to Pfizer. But yeah, it's a little interesting that for every other vaccine, nobody really cares where it came from. But for COVID, we've been talking about it almost incessantly. So it's going to be an interesting thing for the historians to look back on.
Dr. Labos, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll be listening on Sunday at 8:10 when you're on with Ken.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon.